thank you very much, guys, that you give me the chance to talk about this idea. So I would just like to share my ideas on the whole thing and then have a discussion. And to be honest, we'll see where it's going to. So just to give you an idea where I am, beside the horrible metaphor, if we're talking about cakes, I'm just preparing the ingredients. So maybe I really forgot something very important. So if you find something, don't freak out. It's a really good point of time to get more ingredients in. Excuse me?
No.
What kind of cake?
Yeah.
A serious
ingredients.
Okay, just a short introduction. I hope you can see that. So, when the whole problem got obvious for me is because I look at serious games on one hand from a design perspective, on the other hand from a learning perspective. And the more I thought about it, the more I discussed with designers and researchers, the more I realized that we don't really know a lot about the player side of the serious games experience. So if we take an example, like Global Conflict Palestine, does everybody know that game? It's a serious game. You play a journalist in Israel. You can whether be a Palestinian, an Israeli, or an American journalist. You interview people and you write newspaper articles. And the interesting part about this game is every session takes 45 minutes, so it's really designed for schools. You also have materials to download and stuff. And so what they really want to do is give you, while playing the game, an experience of the Israel-Palestina conflict. And I think you can be the dumbest kid in the world, but you still would get that. It's quite obvious. The interesting question that kind of got clear for me, the game can explain that problem. It can show different perspectives on the conflict. But the question for me is if players really start to transfer that learning experiences to real life settings, and for instance the Palestina conflict, how do people really think about that after playing the game, and even more important is how do they change their own way of in political issues, so somebody can play the game and totally understand the conflict and even say, okay, this is my perspective on the Israel-Palestina conflict. But the same guy can sit in the subway and just be racist and not care about others or minorities. The game doesn't really hint us there. And even worse, what the game doesn't do is get you there. It doesn't make you a more peaceful person or And the question is, I think a lot of games, for instance, that are designed at Gambit, they don't really try to get to the Gandhi stage. They might not even try to get to the serious, I do this in real life stage. But we're more in the area over there. But I have the assumption that serious games are often aiming at that level, and I see there is a certain problem behind that I think gets obvious for me. So serious games intentionally aim at an explicit or carefully thought out educational purpose. Of course, the definition of serious games is quite tough. There are different ones, and I don't know, some people think that every game is a serious game. I really look at serious games as games where somebody really wants to foster a certain change of perspective of the player, and really intentionally. And the use of serious games is based on the assumption that players develop something like a meaningful learning experience. If you don't aim for that, why would you design intentionally a serious game on a certain topic? It reaches beyond the learning in the game. I think I'm sitting here, I can say that we have a lot of evidence now that players learn a lot in games. We all know that. There is also empirical data on that. But learning beyond the game is kind of the next step, where I think serious games are aiming at that. I also kind of can show that in different aspects, but I'm not sure about that. If games can really intentionally reach beyond the learning in the game, but how and how players learn through serious games is not clear at all. We hardly know it, and I think we should get some evidence on that. And Clark, for instance, says that there is so he made this meta study, and he came up with the conclusion that we don't know, we don't have any evidence for pedagogical effects of serious games yet. So I spent the last weeks on looking at different studies, and sometimes they can even show that people for instance, learn on certain levels, but especially when it comes up to changing real-life behavior, we don't have any evidence yet. That evidence is missing, and I want to talk as a start about 4 problems that I see. One is the aspect of design for change. Like, I think it was interesting for me because Jason's talk and the text we were reading last time was kind of like hitting in that direction that I find very interesting. So even the assumption that we can design for a certain change of the player behavior is already an interesting problem. So I'm interested in what that dimension might be. The other one is learning for change. So how can we even understand like what's going on from a learning theoretical perspective? You know, this is really going on. Playing for change, that's the perspective, like, do players really learn for change? What is going on with the player? And teaching for change, that's an aspect that kind of like hints in the direction that a lot of serious games, like for instance Go Conflict Palestine, they came to the solution, okay, we don't know if players really learn, so why don't we just use it in an educational setting and make the teacher kind of like look that there is learning going on. But again, we don't have any evidence on that. So if we look at design for change, how do we design for change and what kind of change are we talking about? And I think I don't have to get deeper into that because we did it last week and with Jason's talk. So if we look at August's definition of games, I find it very interesting that he really thinks, and I did some research in the last 2 weeks and I've tried to find spots where he's really playing it, but like in the second part of the sentence, the possibility space of the game exceeds the game and spills into the world is a very typical assumption, you know, and he when he writes in his book about September 12, he's kind of like using the interview with a guy that tells him that he thought that he like didn't learn what August wanted him to learn in September 12. So and he even says, yes, some players did a better job working through the conditions of simulation theory, and others like they did a better or worse job, what I also found interesting. So it's like, you know, like if the player gets what the designer wants, he did a good job. If he didn't, he did a bad job. This is also kind of like a claim we often hear. And then he says the key to the experience here, so the player describes, is not the realism of the simulation. Instead, the value of the experience comes directly from his willingness to allow the multiple subjective experiences of the simulation rules play against one another. So kind of like the player is willing to let go and get the simulation fever in the simulation that, for instance, August built up. And this is a very design-oriented perspective on the learning of the player. I think it's kind of like not really showing what the player is really learning. And I think there is a big gap between that area. So we have theoretical concepts, and last time we talked about that too. So like these people, because I wouldn't call August a typical serious game designer, you know. He just wants to be serious with his design, but so these are the ones where you can, you know, like they were writing about it. But I'm also very interested in what do normal designers think what they're doing. Like the people who made Go Conflict Palestine, what were they thinking if they can really reach change? And I would be very interested to talk to designers what the aim of the design is. You know, like if they really, what kind of learning did they try to get? And if we look at the learning side, yeah, how do we learn for change? And there are theoretical assumptions again, like Cheese, Clear, Squire, Schaffer, Sailander, but there are a few people. And a theory that I will just explain to you like in a minute that I find very interesting is from Gregory Bateson. You might know Gregory Bateson from his definition of play. He came up with that idea in the 60s that every play is in kind of like a context. So for instance, fighting in a game is totally cool. You know, like you can see that, you know, kids bite each other. The moment you walk up to a stranger and bite him in his arm, you get arrested, or you know, like, because like he says, like the context is not clear, a game context. And he did a lot of research on that. But he also did a learning theory that is very related to that definition of play. And what he says is that every learning experience starts on a I call it sub-zero level, he calls it perception. So, which is quite clear. Every learning starts with being aware of something, seeing something, you know, perceiving something. That's like the basis where every experience starts, quite clear. But then he says, in a zero level, and he calls this learning zero because he already shows it's almost no learning. This is what a computer can do. It's a reaction to an input. So it's like 0 and 1s. It's, okay, I see something, I react to it. I press something, I do something. And that doesn't mean I understand it. So this form of learning is more what behaviorists were interested in. And then he says there is a third level of learning that is now getting the whole thing, and that's the frame. So the moment I put the perception and the reaction in a frame, it makes sense. For instance, in a game, this means that I just don't react to an input, but I even understand the rules, the setting of the game, etc., the narrative. Like now, in this version, we can talk of if we want to play a game, we need all these 3 levels of learning. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand the game. We need perception, we need reaction, but we also need to understand the frame of the game, which includes narrative, rules, etc. The interesting thing is that he says, well, but there is even a further step, and that one can be called transfer. That's the moment when there is a transfer behind like what is going on in the game and what is going on outside the game, outside the frame. And he says, for instance, he gives an example. As a human, if you're able to transfer one frame into another frame, this is a transfer learning. So this means, for instance, I can play Global Conflict Palestine, understand the rule setting, understand the game, but I can also see, okay, this is really relating to the real Palestine conflict. You know, so I can relate the game experiences to real life experiences. But there is even a further level, and that's transformation. That's the moment when the learner really changes himself. You know, so I can understand the Palestinian conflict and see that I have a game that is reflecting that. But does it really change me? Does it change my perspectives on the world and others? Is a level that is much deeper. And Bateson gives a lot of insights where he shows that, for instance, in therapies, he would work with that model. So he worked with it in therapies. And if we look at it from a game perspective, and we kind of like, this is a total stupid graph that I did like 1 hour ago, to kind of like make clear what I want to show. So if we have on one side these levels from Bateson, from perception, zero, like reaction, framing, transfer, and transformation. On the other hand, we have the aspect that a designer can control and not control. If you look from a theoretical point of view from Bateson, the relation is that the perception, for instance, is something that designers can control a lot. You know, like you can really make clear where is the player looking at, what does he think he's doing. The reaction is something that, you know, like he can make the player do it, but the control is getting down. The framing of the story, you know, is something that the designer can do, but how the player frames it is, you know, like also getting closer to what the player is doing. The transfer is kind of like really out of the reach from the designer now. You know, he can foster it, he can invite it, he can try to get some connections, but it's really up to the player. Like you cannot control it. And the transformation, I would say, it's like out of control. Like, how can you foster to really make somebody change the way he thinks about the world? You know, it's so you can try it, but from a theoretical point of view, if I look from Bateson's perspective, the graph will be like this. So what is serious game design trying to do? I think they try to do this here. Like they think, or they assume that, or they want to be on control in every level. They want people to transfer the learning experience. They want them to change their perspectives. And so if we look at a theory point of view and compare it with, and I also have to say this is my assumption, that's part of the research, it really is like that. And I would be interested what the players do, you know, and this is just a graph, kind of like we don't know anything about how players learn in serious games. But it would be interesting for me to kind of like put it in relation to what designers hope for and what theorists like Bateson show. And yeah, and if serious games are aiming on transformation, there is a concept called transformative learning. It's developed in the 70s. They did a lot of empirical studies, and they did, for instance, there are examples like they take people that are HIV positive, that kind of like gave up, they think they're gonna die. They make an educational program with them, and then they see if the educational program did a change to their perspective about the illness, and if they, for instance, feel that they are in control of their life again. And so they did different studies like that, and yeah, the concept is from Meterov. The ones that already heard me talking sometimes last year was very interested in recursive learning. I found that there is a much better theory to explain the whole thing because it's also empirically studied. You know, like transformative learning is a philosophical, and recursive learning is a philosophical concept. This is an empirical concept. So they really try to do research. And just to give you an idea what this is about, this means that before, like the learner has a certain structure of its expectations, you know, like his prior experiences. So if you look at the model over there, if you mention like who you are is, you know, through your education, your family experiences, blah, blah, blah. And the theory behind it is the moment the learner gets into a certain transformative setting and gets, for instance, a connection with like if this would be a game, the question is, does this game offer him a new structure to experience world? Does it offer him new patterns? Can he transform these patterns, transfer these patterns? And does it change him as a human? Like, does it change his perspectives or not? So there are different empirical studies that they did how to test that. And my question now was, I think it would be interesting to do that empirical research with serious games. So far with transformative learning, they made one study where they looked at e-learning. But there's only one study where they looked at virtual space, and I thought the study looked pretty lame. And I would be interested if we now use serious games, what we can kind of like learn from that. Yeah, from the pay perspective, I think I already said it. There are hardly no empirical studies on learning effects. There are some quantitative studies and a lot of meta studies where they try to look at studies. And most of the time they find that there is hardly no empirical evidence. And by the way, like there is not a single qualitative study, like where they really did interviews and work with the players. So this is not really going on. And teaching is something that I also mentioned. So they do teaching with serious games. They're interested in, there are certain studies that more or less look at simulation, especially in the military area. So in the military it got quite obvious that you have to use a simulation also in an educational setting to really make the people think differently about something. With serious games, they do it, but we don't have any studies proving that it works. And and the question also is how do you do it? You know, like we don't even have educational concepts that explain how you can use a serious game in educational settings. So what are the goals that I want to achieve? I would like to do research on, first of all, the theoretical concept and how to do empirical research on that anyway. I would like to develop a deeper understanding how serious games foster or not foster transformative learning. But before that, I think I have to make clear if serious game designer are really going for that, you know, or if it's just the theorists that pretend or think that this is going on. I would like to do it on a qualitative level. I would really like to do deep, I would like to go deep in the experiences that the players make, even if this means that it will be harder to kind of like get a really clear research result. You know, empirical studies you get a number. I might just get perspectives, and but also look at on educational usage, like how do people do it? Does it work? Does it not work? And in terms of institution that I think of, so the idea for me now is to design a research proposal about that, a research design, and find funding for that. And my dream version would be, of course, do it with Gambit. My second dream in combination, there is an Institute for Educational Change in Barcelona, University of Barcelona. And they contacted me. They do research on transformative learning in virtual space. They never did something with games, but they would be interested in that area. And University of Vienna, it would be much easier to work with kids and schools because it's pretty hard here to, especially because this time I really want to go deeper. So last year I did this research on meaningful learning experiences in any games, and I found out that there are certain aspects that are important. And one of the most important aspects from the study I did last year was that it totally depends on the player and the context he plays it in, his biography, and his prior experiences with something. So, as I could kind of like hint in my last study. I discussed it, I think, half a year ago here, some results. It proved that if you, in a certain time of your life, you play a game and you transfer it because you have a problem in your life, and suddenly you play a game, it totally suits your problem, even if it's, you know, very metaphoric or you know, like, but so, for instance, in the study it got clear that a lot of people took Pokemon as a very important learning experience. I had somebody talking about Monkey Island as a very important aspect of transformative learning. But it seemed to me it was so much about the player and so little about what the designers tried to reach. And of course, nobody talked about a serious game, but you know, I talked to students that were at an age where the serious games development was a bit late, I would say.